For privacy reasons, names and places have been changed. This story is inspired by true events.
On the morning of September 12, 1998, 29-year-old Blake Anderson set out from his rental car at a remote trailhead on Norway's Moskines Island. The Seattle marine engineer, known for his stunning Arctic photography, planned a 3-day trek along the rugged coastal cliffs of the Lofoten archipelago. He never returned. Despite an exhaustive search across the treacherous Nordic terrain and countless interviews with local fishermen, Blake vanished without a trace. For 20 years, his twin sister Rachel lived with the haunting uncertainty of his fate, while the harsh Norwegian waters kept their secrets. Then, in 2018, a violent storm exposed a partially submerged fishing vessel in a remote cove, revealing evidence that would finally unravel the mystery of Blake Anderson's disappearance. This is the complete investigation into what happened on those isolated cliffs, where one man's final photographs would prove more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this content, consider liking and subscribing to our channel. Now let's continue. The jagged coastline of Norway's Lofoten Islands rose like ancient teeth against the Arctic sky in September 1998, when Blake Anderson embarked on what should have been a routine 3-day hiking expedition. The 29-year-old marine engineer from Seattle had always been drawn to the raw beauty of northern landscapes, his camera an extension of his curious spirit. That crisp autumn morning began like any other in the remote fishing village of Moskines. Blake's rental car, a modest blue Volvo, sat quietly in the gravel parking lot at the Munkebo trailhead. Inside his backpack, carefully packed the night before, lay his prized Nikon camera, 3 extra rolls of film, and enough supplies for his planned trek along the coastal cliffs. The last confirmed sighting of Blake came from Astrid Pedersen, owner of the local grocery store, who remembered him purchasing additional hiking supplies. He was so excited about capturing the golden hour light on the fjords, she would later tell investigators. Said he'd found some spots where the old fishing boats made perfect subjects against the mountains. When Blake failed to return to his guest house 3 days later, the owner, Christian Hagen, immediately notified the authorities. The response was swift but complicated by the region's challenging terrain. Marshal Eric Johansson led the initial search, coordinating with local volunteer groups who knew the treacherous coastal paths intimately. Blake's rental car yielded the first troubling clues. His hiking plan, meticulously detailed on a topographical map, lay on the passenger seat. A second camera bag remained locked in the trunk, along with his laptop and satellite phone. Everything appeared organized, deliberate, the preparations of an experienced outdoorsman who intended to return. 6,000 miles away in Seattle, Rachel Anderson was preparing quarterly reports at her forensic accounting firm when the call came. The connection crackled with static as Marshal Johansson explained that her twin brother was missing. Rachel would later recall how the world seemed to tilt on its axis at that moment, how the numbers on her computer screen blurred into meaningless patterns. The search expanded over the following days. Helicopter crews scanned the coastline while ground teams combed the narrow trails that wound between Moskines' peaks. Local fishermen joined the effort, their boats tracing patterns across the steel-gray waters of the Norwegian Sea. But the landscape kept its secrets. No backpack was found, no camera, no sign of Blake's passage across the rugged terrain. Rachel arrived in Moskines 5 days after her brother's disappearance. She brought with her a stack of photographs, Blake's work from previous expeditions. The images revealed his eye for composition, his ability to capture the intersection of human industry and natural beauty. Many featured fishing vessels against dramatic backgrounds, a subject that had increasingly dominated his portfolio. As September gave way to October, hope began to fade. The search area had expanded to over 50 square miles, but the harsh Nordic environment refused to yield any clues. Weather conditions deteriorated, with early winter storms forcing periodic suspensions of the search efforts. Local residents spoke in hushed tones about others who had vanished in these mountains, about how the landscape could swallow a person whole. The official search was scaled back after 3 weeks. Rachel remained in Moskines for another month, walking the trails herself, speaking to fishermen, showing her brother's photograph in every village along the coast. She found herself studying the same views Blake had sought to capture, trying to see the world through his lens, hoping to understand what might have drawn him off the marked trails. Before returning to Seattle, Rachel stood at the Munkebo trailhead one final time. The parking lot where Blake's rental car had been found was dusted with early snow. The mountains rose before her, magnificent and indifferent. Somewhere in that vast landscape, her brother's last moments remained locked in time, like an image waiting to be developed. What no one knew then was that the truth lay not in the mountains, but in the depths of the Norwegian Sea, where a fisherman's boat and a photographer's final images would remain hidden for 20 years, preserving evidence of a crime that had been disguised as a hiking tragedy. As winter's early darkness crept across the Lofoten archipelago, Marshal Eric Johansson methodically spread Blake Anderson's recovered belongings across his office desk. Each item told its own story. A high-end tripod, still in its protective case, suggested Blake hadn't reached his intended photography locations. A detailed equipment log, written in precise handwriting, listed every lens and filter he'd brought to Norway. Most telling was his primary camera bag, found locked in the rental car's trunk, containing his most expensive equipment. Johansson's investigation quickly revealed Blake's meticulous nature. His laptop contained detailed research on tide tables, weather patterns, and the optimal times for photographing the region's traditional fishing villages. Email correspondence with his sister Rachel showed he'd planned every aspect of his trip, down to the specific angles of light he hoped to capture at various locations along the coast. The marshal's interviews with local hikers painted a consistent picture. 2 German tourists reported seeing Blake on the trail's first section, describing him as well-equipped and moving at a confident pace. A Norwegian family remembered him photographing their children near a stream, roughly 2 miles from the trailhead. After that point, the sightings ceased. The local fishing community initially proved invaluable to the investigation. Weather-worn men in thick sweaters arrived at the police station daily, offering detailed knowledge of hidden coves and treacherous currents. Among them was Nils Eriksson, a quiet figure who spoke of dangerous spots where photographers sometimes ventured for the perfect shot. His insights seemed helpful at the time, though years later, these same conversations would be reviewed in a dramatically different light. As the investigation progressed, Johansson's team faced mounting challenges. The terrain itself worked against them, with steep cliffs and deep fjords hampering search efforts. Autumn storms repeatedly forced the suspension of helicopter operations, while ground teams battled deteriorating conditions on the narrow coastal paths. Rachel Anderson arrived with her forensic accountant's eye for detail, transforming one wall of the investigation room into a precise timeline of her brother's last known movements. She noticed patterns others had missed, including her brother's habit of photographing working boats rather than just scenic vistas. This detail would prove crucial 2 decades later, though at the time it seemed merely a curious observation about Blake's artistic preferences. The investigation team analyzed Blake's remaining photography equipment with particular attention. The memory card in his backup camera, found in the rental car, revealed shots from his first day in Lofoten, misty harbors, fishing boats at dawn, and one final image of his boot prints leading up the trail. Dr. Magnus Olsen, brought in to examine the technical aspects of the case, noted that Blake's primary camera was missing, along with his hiking backpack and satellite phone. As October progressed, the investigation began to suggest 3 possible scenarios. The first and most obvious was a hiking accident, though the absence of any physical evidence made this increasingly doubtful. The second possibility, that Blake had voluntarily disappeared, was quickly dismissed, as said given his close relationship with his sister and his thriving career. The third option, foul play, remained on the table, though without a crime scene or body, it was impossible to pursue effectively. The case took an unexpected turn when several local fishermen reported equipment theft and tampering with their vessels. Among these reports was Nils Eriksson's claim that his boat had been stolen and presumably lost at sea. At the time, these incidents appeared unrelated to Blake's disappearance, filed away as routine maritime crime reports. By the investigation's fourth week, Marshal Johansson faced the difficult task of scaling back operations. The case file grew thick with witness statements, search grid maps, and weather reports, but no concrete leads emerged. Rachel Anderson returned to Seattle carrying copies of every document, determined to continue the search for answers. The investigation remained officially open but gradually cooled, becoming one of those mysteries that haunted the collective memory of Moskines. What no one realized then was that the truth floated just beneath the surface, waiting for a storm powerful enough to reveal its secrets. The evidence lay preserved in the cold Norwegian waters, as patient as the justice it would eventually serve. As winter descended on the Lofoten Islands, the search for Blake Anderson gradually faded like footprints in fresh snow. The intense activity that had marked those first crucial weeks gave way to a quieter, more methodical approach. Marshal Erik Johansson found himself spending long evenings reviewing the same files, hoping to find something everyone had missed. By December 1998, the daily searches had dwindled to occasional patrols. The harsh Nordic winter made extensive ground operations impossible, and the local volunteer teams, who had given so much of their time and energy, reluctantly returned to their regular lives. The community's initial urgency transformed into a lingering sadness, a shared weight carried by those who remembered the American photographer's friendly smile. Rachel Anderson refused to let her brother's case slip into obscurity. She established a small office in Seattle, dedicated to keeping Blake's disappearance in the public eye, using her skills as a forensic accountant to trace every possible lead. Her dining room walls became a testament to her dedication, covered with maps, photographs, and timelines. Every 3 months, she made the long journey back to Moskines, each time hoping for a breakthrough that never came. The investigation explored every conceivable scenario. Accident seemed the most likely explanation. The treacherous coastal paths had claimed lives before, yet the complete absence of any trace of Blake's equipment troubled investigators. Even in cases where hikers had fallen from the cliffs, some evidence typically surfaced. A backpack caught on rocks, a camera washed up on shore, a piece of clothing tangled in fishing nets. Blake's disappearance left no such traces. Among the many loose ends was a series of unusual incidents reported around the time of Blake's disappearance. Several local fishermen complained of equipment tampering and theft. Nils Eriksson, a respected member of the fishing community, reported his boat stolen just weeks after Blake vanished. At the time, these incidents were logged as routine maritime crimes, their potential connection to the missing photographer overlooked in the chaos of the larger investigation. As months turned into years, the case file gathered dust in Marshal Johansson's office. Occasionally, similar cases from other parts of Norway would prompt a review of Blake's disappearance, but no meaningful connections emerged. The file grew thicker with false leads and dead ends, each new page adding to the frustration of those who remembered the case. Tourism in Moskines gradually recovered, though local guides always included a warning about staying on marked trails, using Blake's story as a cautionary tale. His photographs, particularly those of the fishing villages at dawn, became part of the region's cultural memory, displayed in the local museum alongside the story of his disappearance. Rachel's determination never wavered. She established a scholarship in Blake's name for marine photography students, ensuring that his passion for documenting coastal life would continue through others' work. Every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, she published new appeals for information in Norwegian newspapers, her hope sustained by the smallest possibilities. The case remained technically open but effectively cold. Marshall Johansson kept Blake's file in his active drawer, a personal reminder of the one case he couldn't solve. Sometimes, during quiet moments, he would pull out the satellite images of the search area, his eyes tracing the countless inlets and coves where answers might still hide. The sea held its secrets well. Nils Eriksson continued his fishing operations, his stolen boat written off as another unfortunate loss to the Norwegian Sea. He grew older, his presence in the community gradually diminishing as younger fishermen took over the traditional routes. The weight of his knowledge seemed to bow his shoulders, though none who knew him understood why. Time moved forward as it always does. The Lofoten Islands witnessed 20 changing seasons, each bringing its own storms and calm periods. Technology advanced, forensic techniques evolved, and new methods of searching remote areas were developed. Yet Blake Anderson remained missing, his fate unknown. Until 2018, when a particularly violent storm would stir up more than just waves, bringing to the surface a truth that had been submerged for 2 decades. The sea, it seemed, had finally decided to share its testimony. The autumn storm of 2018 battered the Lofoten coastline with unprecedented fury, churning the Norwegian Sea into a frenzy of white-capped waves and driving rain. When the waters finally calmed, they revealed a secret they had guarded for 20 years. In the shallow waters of a remote cove near Moskines, local fisherman Henrik Larsson spotted the distinctive blue hull of a partially submerged vessel, its weathered frame exposed by the storm's violence. The boat's discovery might have been dismissed as just another piece of maritime debris, if not for Dr. Magnus Olsson's methodical approach to marine forensics. As the vessel was carefully raised from its watery grave, Olsson immediately recognized it as matching the specifications of the boat Nils Eriksson had reported stolen in 1998. The coincidence was too significant to ignore. Initial examination revealed the boat's registration numbers had been deliberately obscured, but decades of saltwater exposure hadn't erased all traces of its history. Under the harsh lights of the forensics lab, the vessel began to tell its story. Dark stains on the deck planks, nearly invisible to the naked eye, fluoresced under specialized lighting. DNA analysis would later confirm what seemed impossible. These stains contained Blake Anderson's blood. The discovery sent shockwaves through the investigation team. Marshal Eric Johansson, now nearing retirement, returned to active duty to oversee the renewed investigation. The boat's recovery site was treated as a crime scene, with modern forensic techniques revealing details that would have been impossible to detect 20 years earlier. More evidence emerged as investigators meticulously documented every inch of the vessel. Beneath layers of marine growth, they found scratch marks consistent with a struggle. A damaged camera lens, wedged between the deck planks, matched the model Blake had carried. But the most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. Traces of DNA preserved in the boat's sealed cabin matched both Blake Anderson and Nils Eriksson. Rachel Anderson received the news while preparing for another trip to Norway, her 79th journey since her brother's disappearance. The scientific confirmation of Blake's presence on that boat validated what she had suspected for years. His disappearance was no hiking accident. The evidence suggested a violent encounter, one that had been deliberately hidden beneath the waves. Dr. Olsson's team made another crucial discovery while examining the boat's mechanical systems. The vessel's fuel lines showed signs of intentional damage, suggesting it had been deliberately scuttled. This finding contradicted Nils Eriksson's original report of theft, raising questions about his role in the boat's disappearance. The recovered vessel became a time capsule of that fatal day in 1998. Modern forensic techniques revealed a series of events that had occurred on its deck: a struggle near the stern, a significant impact against the port gunwale, and evidence of something heavy being dragged across the deck. Each piece of evidence added another layer to the emerging truth about Blake Anderson's final moments. As news of the discovery spread through Moskines, the community's long-buried memories of that autumn resurfaced. Elderly fishermen recalled details they had previously dismissed as unimportant. Several remembered seeing Ericsson's boat in unusual locations during the days surrounding Blake's disappearance, far from its normal fishing grounds. The boat's discovery transformed a 20-year-old missing persons case into an active murder investigation. Marshal Johansson's team began the painstaking process of reconstructing events from physical evidence that had been preserved by the cold Norwegian waters. Each new finding brought them closer to understanding what had really happened to the American photographer who had come to document their shores. For Rachel Anderson, the boat's emergence from the depths represented both an answer and a new question. While it confirmed her worst fears about her brother's fate, it also opened the door to finally understanding why Blake had vanished on that autumn day in 1998. The truth, it seemed, had been floating just beneath the surface all along, waiting for the right moment to emerge from the depths of the Norwegian Sea. The discovery of Nils Ericsson's boat transformed the Lofoten Islands investigation from a decades-old cold case into a modern forensic pursuit. Marshal Eric Johansson's office, once filled with yellowing files and faded photographs, now hummed with digital equipment and the quiet precision of scientific analysis. Rachel Anderson brought her forensic accounting expertise to bear on 20 years of maritime records. Her trained eye detected patterns in Ericsson's fishing operation that had gone unnoticed in 1998. The routes his boat took often deviated from traditional fishing grounds, following irregular patterns that made little sense for commercial fishing, but aligned perfectly with known smuggling channels. Dr. Magnus Olsson's laboratory became the heart of the new investigation. Under his supervision, every splinter and stain from the recovered boat underwent rigorous analysis. The team used advanced DNA extraction techniques to separate biological material from years of accumulated sea life. Each sample told its own story: a drop of blood here, a skin cell there, building a scientific narrative of Blake Anderson's final moments. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source: Blake's recovered camera memory card, preserved within a waterproof case wedged beneath the boat's deck plates. Though severely damaged, forensic technicians managed to salvage several images. The timestamps created a precise timeline of Blake's last day alive. More importantly, they revealed what he had been photographing before his death. The recovered photographs showed more than just scenic Norwegian vistas. In the background of several shots, barely noticeable to casual observation, Ericsson's boat appeared in locations that contradicted his official fishing logs. One particular image, taken just hours before Blake's disappearance, captured distant figures transferring unmarked crates between vessels in a secluded fjord. Rachel spent countless hours analyzing her brother's final photographs. Her financial expertise revealed discrepancies between Ericsson's reported income and his actual movements. The numbers told a story of a fishing operation that served as a cover for something far more profitable. Every transaction she traced added another piece to the puzzle. Marshal Johansson coordinated with international law enforcement to reconstruct the broader context of Ericsson's activities. Records from multiple agencies suggested a pattern of drug smuggling along the Norwegian coast during the late 1990s. Blake's photographs had inadvertently documented one of these operations, signing his own death warrant in the process. The investigation team used modern sonar equipment to map the seabed around the recovered boat's location. The search revealed several heavy objects that had been deliberately sunk. Among them, they found Blake's camera housing, the metal corroded but still intact, containing film that would later provide crucial evidence. As technology pieced together the past, human memory began to yield its own clues. Local fishermen, no longer bound by old loyalties, shared stories of Eriksson's unusual behavior in the weeks following Blake's disappearance. They recalled his sudden decision to repaint his boat, his nervous manner when Coast Guard vessels approached, and his increasing isolation from the community. The new investigation moved with methodical precision, building an airtight case through forensic evidence and financial records. Modern DNA analysis confirmed that blood found on the recovered boat belonged to Blake Anderson, while trace evidence placed Eriksson at the scene. The scientific certainty of these findings stood in stark contrast to the nebulous theories that had surrounded the case in 1998. Rachel's dedication to understanding her brother's final days proved invaluable. Her systematic review of maritime records revealed how Eriksson had used his legitimate fishing business to mask criminal activities for years. Blake's photography had threatened to expose this operation, leading to a confrontation that ended in murder. The investigation team worked tirelessly, knowing they were racing against time. Nils Eriksson was now elderly, his mind beginning to fade. Yet the evidence they gathered spoke clearly across the decades. Blake Anderson had not died in a hiking accident. He had been killed because he witnessed something he was never meant to see, his body hidden in the same waters that had finally revealed the truth. The breakthrough in Blake Anderson's case came not through a dramatic revelation, but through the quiet persistence of dementia. On a gray morning in March 2019, Nils Eriksson sat in the interview room of the Moskines police station, his weathered hands trembling as he stared at the photographs spread before him. Marshal Eric Johansson had carefully selected the images from Blake's recovered memory card. They showed Eriksson's boat in the secluded fjord, the grainy figures moving crates under the cover of dawn. The old fisherman's eyes flickered with recognition, then fear, as decades of carefully maintained silence began to crack. "I never meant for any of it to happen," Eriksson whispered, his voice carrying the weight of 20 years of guilt. The American, he was just there with his camera, wrong place, wrong time. As Eriksson's confession unfolded, the events of September 1998 emerged with startling clarity. Blake had been hiking along the coastal cliffs when he spotted unusual activity in the fjord below. His photographer's instinct drew him closer, his telephoto lens capturing details that would prove fatal. Faces, cargo, coordinates that mapped a sophisticated drug smuggling operation. Eriksson described how he first noticed the flash of Blake's camera reflecting off the water. The American had found a perfect vantage point, unknowingly documenting evidence that could dismantle years of careful planning. The smuggling operation had been running smoothly for nearly a decade, using traditional fishing routes to move drugs along the Norwegian coast. "I called out to him," Eriksson continued, his memory surprisingly sharp despite his condition. "Invited him aboard to photograph the boat up close. He was so excited, this American photographer, talking about the perfect morning light, the way the boat sat in the water." The violence erupted when Blake reviewed his photos on the boat's deck. He noticed details in the background that didn't fit with ordinary fishing operations. His questions became more pointed, his manner more guarded. Eriksson described the moment Blake realized what he had stumbled upon, the flash of understanding in his eyes just before he tried to run. The struggle was brief but brutal. Blake's camera went overboard first, followed by a desperate scuffle that ended with the photographer unconscious and bleeding on the deck. Eriksson's hands shook as he recounted weighing down Blake's body with old engine parts before sending him into the depths of the Norwegian Sea. Rachel Anderson, present for the confession, maintained her composure with the same strength that had driven her 20-year search for answers. Her forensic accountant's mind captured every detail as Eriksson described how he scuttled his own boat weeks later, creating the theft story to explain its disappearance and the evidence it contained. The old fisherman drew a crude map, marking the location where he had disposed of Blake's body. His hands moved with surprising certainty across the paper, muscle memory overriding the fog of dementia. The coordinates he provided matched perfectly with anomalies detected in recent sonar surveys of the seabed. Ericsson's confession filled in the gaps that technology alone could not bridge. He detailed his smuggling operation scope, the network of corrupt officials who had helped conceal Blake's disappearance, and the gradual unraveling of his own life under the weight of guilt. The profitable drug trade that had once seemed worth killing for now emerged as a hollow prize that had cost him everything. As the confession concluded, Ericsson turned to Rachel Anderson. "Your brother," he said, his voice barely audible. "He saw beauty everywhere, even in an old fishing boat. I think about that every day." Then his lucidity faded, leaving him staring vacantly at the photographs that had finally broken his silence. The breakthrough provided more than just closure. It offered validation for 20 years of relentless investigation. Rachel's dedication, Marshall Johansson's persistence, and Dr. Olson's scientific precision had finally illuminated the truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of a simple missing persons case. Blake Anderson had died not because he lost his way on a mountain trail, but because his photographer's eye had captured one secret too many in the pristine waters of the Norwegian Sea. In the crisp autumn of 2019, Blake Anderson's remains were finally lifted from the cold waters of the Norwegian Sea. The recovery operation, guided by Nils Ericsson's hand-drawn map, brought 2 decades of uncertainty to an end. Marine archaeologists worked methodically in the depths, documenting every detail as they raised what time and tide had left of the young photographer from Seattle. The recovery team found Blake's body exactly where Ericsson had indicated, weighted down by rusted engine parts from his fishing boat. His camera, still clutched in his hands, had been preserved by its waterproof housing, the final roll of film intact though badly degraded. The images, painstakingly restored by forensic photographers, provided a haunting chronicle of his last moments alive. Rachel Anderson stood on the deck of the recovery vessel, watching as her brother's remains were brought to the surface. 20 years of searching had aged her, but she maintained the same steady composure that had characterized her long pursuit of truth. When the divers surfaced with Blake's camera, she recognized it immediately. The same model she had given him for his 29th birthday, just months before his final journey. The impact of the case's resolution rippled through the Lofoten Islands community. Local fishing regulations were tightened, with new protocols established for monitoring vessel movements in remote fjords. The old-timers who had known Ericsson spoke of how the sea had finally refused to keep his secret, as if the waters themselves had chosen to reveal the truth. Marshal Eric Johansson, now in his final year before retirement, oversaw the formal closure of the case. The evidence room that had housed Blake's file for 2 decades was finally cleared. Its contents moved to the archives with a solved case number. Johansson would later remark that he could finally sleep through the night, no longer haunted by the questions that had plagued him since 1998. Nils Ericsson never stood trial for Blake's murder. His dementia progressed rapidly after his confession, and he died in custody 3 months later, his last coherent words a repeated apology to the photographer whose life he had taken. The prison chaplain reported that Ericsson spent his final days staring at the sea through his cell window, as if still searching for absolution in the waters that had both concealed and revealed his crime. In Seattle, Rachel established the Blake Anderson Foundation for Investigative Photography, using the settlement from the Norwegian government to fund young photographers documenting environmental and criminal justice issues. The foundation's first exhibition featured Blake's recovered photographs, including the images that had cost him his life, now serving as powerful testimony to the importance of bearing witness. Dr. Magnus Olsson published a comprehensive paper on the forensic techniques used to solve the case, establishing new protocols for investigating cold cases involving marine environments. His research highlighted how advances in DNA preservation and analysis had transformed a 20-year-old mystery into a solvable crime, offering hope for other families waiting for answers. Blake's memorial service, held on a bright September morning in 2019, drew hundreds of attendees from both sides of the Atlantic. Norwegian fishermen Stu D alongside American photographers as Rachel scattered some of her brother's ashes in the waters near Moskines. The rest she took home to Seattle, completing Blake's final journey 2 decades after it began. The Lofoten Islands still draw photographers from around the world, though now they come not just for the dramatic landscapes, but also to pay tribute to Blake Anderson. His recovered photographs hang in the Moskines Maritime Museum, their beauty inseparable from their testimony. Each image captures not only the stark grace of the Norwegian coast, but also the unflinching eye of a photographer who documented truth until his final moment. In the years following the case's resolution, Rachel often returned to the Lofoten Islands, no longer searching for answers but finding solace in the landscapes her brother had loved. She would stand at the spots where he had set up his tripod, seeing through his lens the beauty that had drawn him to these remote shores. The mountains still rose like ancient teeth against the Arctic sky, but now they held not mystery but memory, not questions but quiet certainty about the truth that had finally emerged from the depths.